Hey everyone, Anark here. If you've been watching my channel, you'll have noticed that a topic I return to a lot is the importance of educating the masses on the foundations of leftist ideology. This is because I don't see radical education as an indulgence. I see it as a necessary condition to an enduring and meaningful social revolution. Given that we are living in times when the oligarchs of the planet are quickly at work eliminating the luxury of peaceful transformation, every moment that's available to us before violent escalation is now that much more important. Revolution begins not in a grand siege, nor in glorious triumph, but in the modest planting of seeds in the minds of our fellow humans. If we fail to meet such a burden, there is a very real risk that whatever revolt is coming will be impermanent, taken over by opportunists, or undermined by changing social conditions. I take special pains to return to this topic because there is what I see as a fatalistic attitude among many on the left. Through one train of thought or another, they've come to convince themselves that their own radicalism is all that matters, that either the majority will arrive upon the truth by themselves without assistance, or that it's a waste of time attempting to change the minds of others to begin with. Suffice to say, I reject all such fatalism. For some people, uprooting the roots of bigotry and social brainwashing will be quite a challenge, while for others it will be second nature. But we can't simply trust to the natural cycles to solve such conundrums. There are millennia of history to remind us what terrible poverty and subjugation humans might endure if they don't know what is possible to achieve through struggle. Horrific systems need not perpetuate themselves through bare force, nor even through the threat of it. All they must do is imprint a shallow horizon of expectation and knowledge upon the people, reinforcing attitudes of exhausted compliance. And if these shallow horizons are allowed to fester, humans can be made to betray their own interests and march behind any number of despots and charlatans. Every propaganda system in existence is occupied upon distracting from and obscuring the real causes of society's decay. Yet, we must not forget the countless examples in history of what humans may achieve if they can be shown the face of their true enemies and mobilized toward rebellion. Therefore, the primary duty of the organizer is to dissolve the compliant mind and to plant inside it a clear image of liberation. Much comes after, but first comes knowledge. In order for this task to be carried out fruitfully, it is extremely important that we hold sober-minded discussions about how each of the tools for education can be used, what their limitations are, and under what conditions they will prevail. The purpose of today's video is therefore to argue that we cannot shy away from the work of persuading others, even when it becomes difficult. We must instead seize and perfect the tools which will allow us to change people's minds, or else we may find that many who should be our natural allies will instead be standing on the other side of the ramparts when the time comes that our conflicts escalate to violence. Today, I'm going to argue for the value of dispute. So, what do I mean when I say dispute? When I use this word, I'm referring to a broad array of circumstances in which we disagree with others, yet choose to disentangle that disagreement instead of ignore it. This includes a variety of situations in both personal and public settings, both moderated and spontaneous. This video should therefore not be translated as a narrow defense of formal debate, although much of this commentary will apply to that setting either directly or indirectly. Ultimately, what I seek to lay out here is a justification for why it is valuable to vocally disagree with one another and to seek resolution for that disagreement. In honor of such a claim, I'll structure the coming video as a series of common objections and their responses. I'll go one by one, provide an analysis of each, and use those perspectives as a platform to deepen our discussion. By the end, I hope I'll have created a somewhat comprehensive picture of how, why, and when dispute is useful. Let's start with something that I hear people say somewhat regularly. It sounds something like, "It's silly to think that arguing with people is ever going to change anything. You're just wasting your breath." Lying underneath this statement is a very bizarre claim, namely that no one ever changes their mind due to argumentation. In such a reductive worldview, we are asked to believe that those who hold an opinion will hold it permanently, and there is nothing we can do about it. Certainly, while we must concede that some people are so dug in that they'll never question their beliefs no matter what arguments they confront, it's absurd to pretend that this is the majority. People are not empty automatons acting sheerly out of self-interest, ignoring all introspection and reason. Those who have not yet arrived at the juncture of leftist thought are, more often, just operating on a completely different set of foundational premises. So, how do we decide whether the person we're speaking with is a waste of our time or whether we're facilitating a process of transformation? Well, there's a problem with that way of thinking because we're inherently very bad at judging which is which. After all, people rarely change their minds during a conversation, even those engaging entirely in good faith. This leads to a common frustration where the person you're speaking with has utterly failed to respond to what you're saying, but they refuse to give up the point. However, there's no need to become frustrated when this takes place. The process of changing one's perspective typically happens slowly over a long period of time. A nagging thought is planted in the back of their mind that they must confront over and over every time they try to think in the old way, and as they repeatedly fail to create a satisfying internal response, they slowly begin to accept that they may have been wrong. The best way to achieve this state of affairs, given that we're unable to read the minds of those we're speaking with and we're unable to know the future of how our conversations will affect them, is that we should just default to assuming everyone is a potential convert. If we give in to our instincts in assuming who is lost and who is not, we'll have a tendency, especially when the conversations get hard, to inherently sort our opponents in with the impossible to convert. Whereas, if we assume that every person we're speaking to is inherently capable of confronting their own ideas and changing them, we will mentally prepare ourselves to do the work of converting every single person we come across, and thus leave no possible convert behind. Sure, once again, there will be some we misassess in this process, and for whom no amount of argumentation will ever bring to understand the error of their ways. But even then, I contend, we will still usually not be wasting our time because dispute is not only about changing the minds of our opponents. Dispute is also about persuading those who are watching, arming allies on the sidelines with better arguments, and developing our own rhetorical tools through usage. Thus, if you're trying to decide whether your argument is really worth your time, ask yourself these questions. 1. Am I dismantling my opponent's arguments and leaving only my position as a tenable replacement? 2. Is anyone watching this dispute who may also have to confront these arguments for themselves? 3. Is anyone watching this argument who may be able to use the rhetorical tools I'm demonstrating for themselves? And 4. Am I developing better rhetoric for myself in future occasions? If any of these are true, you might want to stick it out and redesign your arguments with a recognition toward whichever framework you're acting inside. For example, what if several people are watching, but you can tell the person you're speaking with is completely dug in? In this occasion, because you're no longer arguing with them to convince them, you should switch your style, being aware that your goal is now to convince everyone who's watching. After all, what does it matter if the person you're debating is ignoring your points if you've planted a seed of doubt in the minds of all the spectators? Even if only your allies are watching, you could very well be providing them with new arguments that they will be able to use the next time they encounter such a situation. Even in the worst case scenario, let's say your opponent is not really engaging with your arguments at all, and that further, no one is even watching. At first glance, this may appear to be the most complete waste of time imaginable, but that would be a mistake. This situation is another kind of opportunity. Not only are you now in an extremely safe environment to test out your arguments, but the person you're speaking with has essentially decided to volunteer the rhetoric from their echo chamber. In isolation, they've now given you a safe opportunity to prepare yourself for higher risk scenarios to come, neutering their talking points of their surprise factor the next time you confront them. This exposes another very important thing to understand. Argument is not only for others, it's also for you. Put simply, once you stop thinking of arguments as a success only if they convince your opponent on the spot, you'll begin to develop your rhetoric in a much more holistic fashion. Every engagement is an opportunity to train ourselves in the tools of persuasion, to demonstrate those tools to others, and to plant ideas in the minds of anyone who is listening. Another reaction I encounter from time to time is that we should stop arguing and organize. But one does not preclude the other. The idea that there's some binary between organizing and interpersonal persuasion is wrong-minded. Not only do we have the ability to simply prioritize our time and engage in either given the circumstance, it's wrong to even think that the two are distinctly separate to begin with. The famous adage to educate, agitate, organize is not just a list of related words. It's an order of operations. People who are not educated will not be conducive to being properly agitated, and those who are not properly agitated will not be conducive to being organized. A heated argument is often necessary in order to even begin the process of education for many. After all, people whose minds have been poisoned toward the very topics which will bring their liberation are not magically going to become allies in the absence of persuasion. It is necessary that we dismantle the elaborate brainwashing of capitalist realism so that their minds will become a more fertile soil for leftist thought to take root. Only then can we expect that the seeds we have planted will even grow to fruition instead of fester as points of resentment. In this way, argumentation could be seen as a part of organizing. It doesn't, of course, replace the very necessary work of organizing, but when we all view it as our duty to persuade others, it has the effect of creating a more pliable populace to be agitated and organized at a later date. It's therefore of the utmost necessity that we mobilize an army of persuaders. This cumulative action of individuals seizing the opportunities that present themselves and changing the minds of others every time they get the chance is what will create the right-minded organizers of the future. Not only is argumentation then not in conflict with organizing, it behooves the organizer to engage in and perfect the tools of rhetoric to make their work easier. Our organizations will be nothing more than social clubs if there is not a constant flux of new blood, a newly invigorated and enlightened mass of people ready to constantly revitalize our projects and drive them forward. And that will never happen if we just stand by and wait for the tides of opinion to turn on their own. Others take a position against argumentation because they believe that all you do when you engage is legitimize your opponent. This can be a concern, especially when considering opponents who are not just misguided, but who espouse truly revolting positions. It's very important to consider what the outcomes of your choice to debate an opponent will be. It's not true to say that all engagement legitimizes the opponent, but it's true to say that a debate which does not demolish the opponent's position will have a tendency to give them legitimacy, especially if they started from a marginalized position. Thus, it's very important to be strategic when choosing who to debate, in what forum, and what rhetorical methods are used. Fascists, for example, should be denied a public platform in every occasion possible. Not because their arguments are strong, but because they default to underhanded tactics, lying to the audience, resorting to emotional appeals, steamrolling, utilizing logical fallacies, and cherry-picked statistics. Said more simply, fascists will utilize any deception necessary to appear strong. Therefore, they should only be engaged with when it can be guaranteed that the debater will utterly defeat them. However, this is not the end of the story. Fascists often have a public platform whether we like it or not. For example, on social media. Unfortunately, social media does not deplatform fascists as a matter of course. Thus, when we choose not to engage with them, we may let them dominate the public digital space. In absence of any pushback, there's a risk that they'll appear to have a popular and uncontested opinion, especially given their tendency to create mass numbers of fake accounts. This is not to say that there are not often occasions where they should not be ignored. Indeed, much of the time they should be, especially if they appear to be a lone crazy shouting in the wind. But if their opinion appears to be gaining traction in a public space, it's very important that someone successfully undermine that appearance of dominance. The fascist, after all, has an entire ideology predicated on that appearance of dominance. And if they can successfully project that appearance, it helps spread their message. Whatever method can be used to lower their station and make them into public laughingstocks is worthwhile. Another common objection is that ridicule is far more potent than argumentation. While this is wrong in a broad sense, it's conditionally true. If, for example, your opponent is engaging in bad faith and their arguments are transparently absurd, ridicule can be highly useful, particularly against those who wish to project an appearance of power, such as the aforementioned fascists. But beware developing your entire rhetorical style around this aspect. When the time finally comes that you're engaged with someone who's not in a position of power, who believes the same things you ridiculed all your previous opponents for, all you'll do is appear childish and quite possibly catalyze their opposition further. Ridicule, like all other rhetorical tools, must be used tactfully. Otherwise, it will often have the exact opposite intended effect, making you look like the one who is fundamentally unserious. If your opponent is not engaging in bad faith, if they project an air of aloof seriousness, or it's not clear to the listener why your opponent's position is absurd, either upon first principle or through your mockery, to those outside your echo chamber, you will just appear to have run out of arguments, which projects weakness and only serves to make others doubt you. Lastly, if you think that ridicule is truly a tool you should use often, ask yourself a question. How often have you changed your position on an issue as important as politics because you were ridiculed? I suspect if you're like most people, almost never. In fact, I suspect that you will have far more memories of having dug in further and embraced your viewpoints more deeply in response to mockery. So, beware, because that is almost certainly the common response to being ridiculed. Ridicule, after all, is a tool that is used to convince an audience more often than it is to convince a person. If you are a leftist and you desire to create a social revolution that has an enduring effect on society, please take very seriously the value of dispute and the importance of your role in that process. Not only are everyday arguments often the best and most common opportunities to educate others that you will ever come across, but they are also excellent opportunities to hone your own rhetorical tools and therefore come to understand your own position even better. So I implore you, when people come to you in good faith or bad and demonstrate their ignorance, don't turn them away. Every time you turn them away, you're missing a very important opportunity. Somebody else down the line will have to be there to pick up that slack. Because when the time comes that we face a reactionary backlash, every person we failed to convert when we had the opportunity will be another unnecessary enemy. While it may be comforting to create a list of reasons as to why each of us should not engage in rigorous argumentation, these can almost all be dismissed as excuses. Worse, they are excuses that will create unprepared organizers and bring about the very real risk of delegitimizing the movement in moments of high importance. When you are sitting in a group of people and you have the opportunity to defeat an argument, but you falter because you have pathologically avoided conflict, and an opponent with terrible positions makes our views look foolish, the most negative outcome is not just that mild discomfort that you'll live with for a day or two afterwards. Everybody who is watching, whether on the fence or in opposition to your view, will now be slightly less confident that a leftist worldview offers coherent ideas. If we are to succeed in enacting this political project upon every juncture available, we must win our battles. So, don't avoid disagreement. Those vocal conflicts serve many purposes, not least of which is education of the person you're attempting to convince, of those who are watching, and of yourself. Such an opportunity should not be taken for granted. The issues at hand are very complex, and to expect people to arrive upon them naturally is a placating delusion. People do not like being wrong, and we must therefore embrace the need for strong rhetoric and the fearless practice of its usage. After all, even in our future society, we should not expect to replace all dispute with agreement. There will always be highly contentious issues over which reasonable people will disagree. And indeed, in a better society, argument is precisely how we will settle those issues. Thus, we should never expect to reach consensus in this society or the one of our ideal future if we fear engaging with ideological opponents in a confrontational and incisive fashion. Vast portions of the populace have been cleverly convinced of ideologies of tacit subservience, of atomized self-sufficiency, and hatred of the weak, because the proliferation of these mindsets is the common goal of every power structure in existence. The people have not just given up. They now fight against their own best interests zealously. It has been said before that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and while such a saying is tempting in its optimism, it's false. The arc of history doesn't naturally bend toward anything. Only by conscious action is any possible future brought to fruition. A people convinced of the natural march of history will always be condemned to stasis. Our job is to plant the seeds of a new world within the minds of the people of this one. We must not see ourselves as the managers of the revolution, nor its dictators in waiting, but its groundskeepers. If the people are to discard their shackles, they must first recognize their bounds. If they are to strike down their masters, they must first know who they are. It's only when the people can see further than the myopia of their systems that they can truly struggle. Cured of such short-sightedness, it's our job to help them see further. Never forget that. In dark times, remind yourself of your duty to those who suffer. It's a duty that endures eternally. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to help spread the work I'm doing here, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Also, if you want to help me eat and pay the bills, become a patron at the Patreon link below. I've also just opened up a new Discord channel, and it's available to anybody that becomes a patron. Anyway, see you around. And remember, we must build the new in the shell of the old.